Hi, welcome to the channel. I'm Mrs. R. Let's do some math. Welcome to today's talk about percent problems. Now, percents are where a lot of people do kind of struggle, so I want to talk about the basics of the word percent before we get too much into the actual math. Percent means per 100. Cent represents 100, like there's 100 cents in a dollar. So when I say that we have 75%, that's 75 per 100. So overall, if we had 300 things, that's 3 sets of 100, we'd have 3 sets of 75, so we'd have 225. When we're thinking about that, this is how we get from percentage notation, like this, to fraction or decimal notation. So since this means 75 per 100, that means 75 out of 100. There's our fraction. Now if we reduce that fraction by dividing both by 25, our simplified fraction then would be 3/4. So 75% of something is the same as 3/4 of something. And then we can also take that into a decimal form. Because of our base 10 system, 75 100ths, when you actually say that, it's the same as if you were reading this decimal. Just remember, this is the tenths place. This is the hundredths place. So we would read that as 75 100ths, which is the same as that fraction, 75 100ths. So these are all equivalent. 75%, 3/4, 0.75. Now, you will notice in a lot of percent problems, it is easiest and most straightforward for most people, not necessarily for you, but for most people, to take the percent in the problem and then calculate using the decimal. So we're going to focus on using the percentages in the problems, using the decimals to do our calculations, and basically just how to take these questions, turn them into an equation that then we can solve. So the first one we're going to try is what percent of 29 is 3? Now, this is the type of question you might have when they're doing just do a percent problem. Now, there are different ways that they phrase these. Sometimes they flip things around. They ask you for different pieces. But overall, in any of these problems, there's going to be some kind of percent. There's going to be a total. There's always a total. Percent is always relative. It's always of something. And then there's going to be, of course, your final quantity. Can't say it's the answer because it's not the answer to this question, but there's a quantity. It's a partial quantity of the total. Now, when we look at these words and try to convert these numbers into an equation that we can use, percent, the 29 is the total, 3 is the quantity we're actually focused on. But we can also look at this word of. Almost every time, I'm not going to say for sure every time, but almost every time the word of in a story problem means multiply. Fractions, percentages, decimals of something, we're going to be multiplying. And then hopefully you're already familiar with our friend is in word problems. Is will always come out to be equals. So this is where we're kind of taking that sentence problem, that question, and bringing it into what looks like an equation. So we're looking for a percentage number times that 29, because that's the total they gave us. So you have some number times 29 equals, and the quantity they gave us is 3. Now there's a lot of different ways you can write this, but we are going to need to use that algebraic process here. We have an unknown number. We don't know what this percentage is going to be. I'm going to use a variable. I'm just going to use p because we're looking for percent eventually. And now that we're kind of moving into this algebraic notation, I'm not going to use the x for multiplication anymore. You can use either the dot. I think that solves a lot of the confusion between an x variable and the multiplication cross. Or you can always use parentheses. So we can say p times 29 like that, or we can put the little dot. Either way. We've got that equals 3. So now I have my number p, that's something, times 29 equals 3. And if you think about your just general solving algebraic equations, in order to get that p by itself, we need to isolate it. So we're going to do the opposite of whatever it says. It says times 29, so we're going to divide by 29. But to keep that balanced, to keep the equation true, we need to divide both sides by 29. So the 29s, the times 29 and divide by 29 do cancel on the left-hand side, leaving us with p equals. And then our result over here is 3 over 29. Now, that is not really what we were expecting. We're looking for a percent. And we know that decimals could convert easily to percentages, but this is not a decimal or a percent. Now, it is a ratio. It's still representing that proportion, how much of this original 29 is represented by the 3. But if you're supposed to give your answer as an actual percent, because it said what percent is it, we're going to need to go to a calculator, divide this out, get the decimal. On the unlucky chance that you are not allowed to use a calculator, we'll do 3 divided by 29. And hopefully you remember how to do this. Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to get a calculator. All right, this is my favorite calculator. It's actually the Desmos graphing calculator app for my iPad. The graphing calculator is way more than we need for this, but I just like to use it for all my things. So really, we're just going to do 3 divided by 29 and see what it tells us. So we have p equals 0.10344. It does keep going. Most of the time on these questions where you're trying to find your percent answers, you're going to need to round your final answer, your final percentage, to about the nearest tenth or the nearest hundredth, which means when we're looking at this decimal representation, we need to keep probably 4 of these digits. I wrote down an extra one, but that's obviously up to your teacher if you're working on this for a class. Make sure you pay attention to their instructions. But this is our decimal version. And if you look, we've got 0.10344, keeps going and going. But remember that idea of 75 100ths? We're looking at 10 100ths and then the 0.3444. So if you take this number and you multiply it by 100, then we end up with our percentage. So this is just a notation switch. That was our decimal. If I take it times 100, then we get p equals 10.34. This is where, now that we've done that notation shift, we have to include the percentage sign. If you just say 10.34, your answer is wrong. You have to include that percentage sign. Now, that was the long-winded version of this problem. We're going to do another one. It'll go a little more quickly now that we understand how to build our equations together. Raising. So here's one. What is 16% of 43? So pick out the things we know. I see is. There's my equal sign. 16%. To do calculations with this, I am going to convert it to decimal version. Now, if you really need to, you can do 16 divided by 100. Or if this makes sense in your brain, move the decimal. So we move the decimal twice, so it's 0.16. Whatever works for you, or whatever you're allowed to do for your class. Then of, remember that's our multiplying. 43, that's our total here actually. So whatever percent of, that's our total. So what we're looking for is that quantity. Kind of like the 3 was. It was the smaller version. 16 is less than 100, so our quantity is smaller than the total. Our equation we're working with, x equals 0.16 times, since we have decimal in here, I'm going to use the parentheses, 43. Now, there's not actually a lot of algebra in this. My x is already isolated. So I just say, okay, what's 0.16 times 43? 6.88. So what is 16% of 43? Well, 6.88. Now, the other way that they can ask this, so we found the percent, we found the quantity. They can sometimes ask for the total also. So here's how that might look. If we say 12 is 40% of what number? So 12 is the quantity. We see the is, that's going to be our equals. 40%, there's our percentage, right? We're going to switch it to decimal notation by either dividing on your calculator by 100 or moving the decimal to the left twice. And then here's our of. So we'll get our multiplication in there. And then of what number? The what number, that's our total. So now we do have more of an algebraic equation where we're going to need to do something to both sides. So just because the colors can get a little weird looking, I'm going to rewrite it. 12 equals 0.40 times x. And we need to isolate that x, so we're going to divide by 0.40. Multiplying by 0.40 and dividing by the same thing will cancel out, so we just have the 12 divided by 0.40. And that comes out to be 30. So there's your answer. 12 is 40% of 30. So that's kind of the three different ways that these can come out and how to translate each of them into equations. And hopefully that helps you with your percentage problems. If you did like this video, if you think that it helped you, please give it a like so that we can make some more videos. And if you have any questions still, or you want to see a different concept, please leave a comment for me. I'm Mrs. R, and this has been me doing math. See you next time.